Cherry Street, on New York's Lower East Side, is a name which conjures up in your mind an idyllic scene of Arcadian villas and trees in blossom. Certainly not the abyss of crime, depravity, filth, and horror, for which it later became known. With the coming of evil, squalid and overcrowded tenement houses. The Manhattan neighborhood known as Cherry Hill was, in colonial times, a cherry orchard on a farm owned by a Dutch settler. By the time the Brooklyn Bridge was constructed, however, in the 1860s, the old residents had long since moved on, leaving the comfortable dwellings and fashionable streets along the East River in the hands of real estate agents and boarding house keepers who offered welcome and affordable accommodation to laborers. But with an ever-increasing population, Cherry Street and its surroundings changed irreversibly. Landlords saw opportunity, and opportunity was money. Old, dilapidated buildings were partitioned into mean and cramped rooms, whilst new and equally nasty tenements were thrown up. And so Cherry Street, like Water Street and Five Points, descended into a notorious slum. In these back-alley buildings, rents were high and standards were low, as money was squeezed from residents who lived hand-to-mouth and whose lives fell into drudgery, loose morals, and the escape of the ever-present grog shop. Today, we journey to New York in 1865, with an account by a sanitary inspector of what it was like to live in one of these poor tenements on Cherry Street. You will discover just how disgusting living conditions were for the working classes. So terrible that he found it hard to describe without violating the decencies of language. This tenement, like so many others, was damp and dirty, with underground vaults full of sewage and indescribable filth, a magnet for disease, flies and ticks, attracted by animal and vegetable waste. It's no small wonder that typhus, tuberculosis, and cholera were rampant in the slums. If you were to find yourself in Gotham Court or Murderer's Alley off Cherry Street, the misery of famine and pestilence all around would be relieved only by the numerous gin shops. But the impact of poor sanitation was only just beginning to be understood at this time, less so accepted as a need for better housing by the city authorities. Health reform came, but it took 2 decades, and, in the meantime, the living conditions of tenants were of little concern to tenement landlords, unless, like you will hear today, an inspector came calling. Before we move on, if you're interested in history like this, and you want to find out more about what life was really like for people in the past, please consider subscribing for more content. If you'd like to support what we make for you, check out the description for links to ways you can help us to continue bringing the past alive. Among the many evils which the Citizens Association of New York have undertaken to be diminished, if it cannot altogether be reformed, is that monster enormity, the tenement houses of New York. It is no exaggeration to declare that the genius of evil never invented a more prolific machinery to degrade and pollute human nature than that promiscuous herding together of men, women, and children, which is the inevitable result of this most atrocious system. The Citizens Association has vindicated both the necessity for its organization and its right to complete the fearless regeneration of municipal evils, among which are those revealed to you here. The Citizens Association was founded by a number of wealthy and influential men who resolved to make an effort to rescue the municipal government from the shameless frauds and oppressions which have too long been allowed, by the apathy of the public, to exist in it, and which have raised our taxation to a point which 10 years ago would have been pronounced fabulous. The public ought to feel deeply indebted to eminent citizens who stepped forward to do the work which is known as nobody's business. It exists to enlighten the working classes, investigate abuses, employ competent legal and medical talent to improve the sanitary condition of New York, and to employ a properly qualified agent throughout the session of legislature, so as to combat the various improper schemes that are introduced annually. The survey of tenement houses extended over the whole of Manhattan Island, which was divided into 29 districts, each assigned to a practicing physician. The number of tenement houses, each of which contain no less than 3 families, is 15,511, while the total population in these and in cellars is 501,224, or half the total residents upon the island, the houses averaging 7 1/4 families each. Of these houses, 3,912 are without sewers, and 100,675 persons inhabit them. It is hard to tell how they live without violating the decencies of language, but we will give a few suggestive extracts further on. The 5th ward has a death rate of 1 in 19, the 15th, a crowded and busy ward, of 1 in 60, while that of the city at large is about 1 in 35. Were the whole of New York to be brought up to this standard, over 7,000 might be annually saved. These horrible pest houses are so identical in feature that in giving one we afford to a great extent as good an idea as though we were to give to all. We must, however, premise that the tenement houses we depict today are by no means the worst, and that there are hundreds whose abysses of crime, depravity, filth, and horror are beyond words. The illustrations reveal the social condition of many thousands of the denizens of this metropolis. They are stern pictures of real life, without the smallest shadow of fancy or the faintest colour of romance. They were made on the spot and represent 2 tenement houses which abut on Cherry Street, near the corner of Roosevelt Street. When these houses were visited, they presented a very much worse condition than at present. Typhoid fever and smallpox had entered many of the apartments, and a fearful harvest of death they reaped among many of the occupants. If you would like to know what terrible responsibilities avarice does not hesitate to assume for the sole purpose of satisfying an itching palm, and into what wretched dens and pest houses human beings are huddled, in order that certain of their species may wear purple and fine linen, and fare sumptuously every day, let him spend a few moments in making a tour of one of these tenements with us. We turn out of Cherry Street into a narrow, blind passage, known in the neighbourhood as West Gotham Court. On either side of the entrance stands a gin shop, the friend of famine and pestilence. As we pass down the court, scores of haggard, hungry-eyed, half-nude children gather at the doorways. Thriftlessness has always its plenitude of heirs. We stop at the last house in the row and ask permission of one of the tenants to step into her habitation. It consists of 2 small rooms, the outer one of which serves as a kitchen, parlour, pantry, dining hall, and wash-house, all enclosed in a space of about 9 by 14 feet. The inner apartment is of the same length, but narrower by at least 3 feet, and is the sleeping room of the entire family. In this particular instance, it contains 2 beds, which, with the walls, were until lately swarming with disgusting vermin. The occupant informs us now, however, that the agent had given her some powder and told her to keep the door closed and burn lime in the room, and she would soon get rid of the boogs, that before she was most ate up with them. We next descended by a steep, slimy staircase to the subterranean regions. The floor of the cellar, soft spongy earth, is covered with blue mould and the depository of heaps of nameless filth. Under the court are the privy vaults and the sewer. The former have undergone a process of purification since our first visit. The latter remains pretty nearly the same, a stagnant pool breeding contagion and death. Escaping from this worse than inquisitorial dungeon as soon as a proper survey will permit, we ascend to the roof. Some improvements have been made here since our introductory visit, we understand, having been reported to the landlord and his agent. After a careful inspection of this block of houses, and ascertaining that each family, know what the number of its members, has the same space, 2 rooms, We pass on to make a call at another of the same class in Murderer's Alley. Here, as in the other inferno, the entrance is guarded by 2 grog shops. It makes one shudder to reflect that helpless innocent childhood must be continually surrounded by the vitiating magnetism of such a locality, and that men and women, through a whole life, can never escape from the disgrace of having been reared in a place that bears the mark of sin upon its front. The passage is about 6 feet in width at the entrance, gradually contracting as we advance, until, at the farther exit, it cannot be more than 2.5 or 3 feet wide. The houses here are in a more cleanly condition than the ones we have just left, but their occupants have the same squalid, filthy appearance. The space occupied by each family is about the same as in West Gotham Court, and the price per month similar, running from $4.50 to $6 per month, according to the floor. Now let us compute the number of human souls crowded into the first block of houses which we first inspected. Fronting on West Gotham Court are 6 double houses, each containing 10 families. To the back of this, in the same block, fronting on West Gotham Court, is a like number of houses, containing a like number of families. In all, 240. Each family will average 5 members, so that we have in this one block no less than 1,200 persons, all huddled within a space which, if the locality was wholesome, is not sufficiently large to properly accommodate 1/10 of the number. The consequences of such a state of things are worthy of the most serious consideration. Stagnant water and decaying garbage generate contagion. Disease spreads, and a whole neighbourhood soon becomes infected by the unhealthy condition of a single tenement. This is a matter which affects the lofty as well as the lowly, for all are contiguous in crowded cities. The pestilence radiates from the courts and alleys to the squares and avenues. We do not know exactly what the rate of yearly mortality is in the houses that we describe, but in some of a similar character it is 1 in 7, while in the more habitable portions of the metropolis it is 1 in 60, the rate in the whole city being 1 in 35. The condition of a large proportion of the tenement houses is one that ought to be brought before the proper authorities in a manner that will not permit them longer to shrink from their proportion of the responsibility. It is a burning shame that New York, the metropolis of a comparatively new country, a city that pays more money than London, Paris, and Berlin inclusive for maintenance of her municipal government, does not insist in having the sanitary regulations so administered that the rate of mortality would not be 8.5 times greater in one locality than another.